O you poor wanderers, who know not your own path, and roam the world in search of wealth, taking dangerous roads, sailing the great sea. O you poor wanderers, it is not your goodness that takes you away from home. The material well-being is what lies within your heart. Poverty took you away. From your mother's bosom you were lost.
Slovenian immigrants from Hungary were part of the migration flows that included a high percentage of population towards the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, up until the First World War. The estimations as to how many Slovenes moved to America during that period are 7 to 25,000. The Immigrant Reception Center allowing entrance into the Promised Land was Ellis Island, near New York. Helen Brody Kaiser recalls the arrival of her parents.
My mother came 1920 maybe, and Pop came, they met over here. And Pop came around that time too. And my mother contracted scarlet fever, she said, and was in a New York hospital for I don't know how long. But Pop came on Christmas Day, the year he came, and I never forget, he said he didn't have anything. One hard salami and one orange. Got off the ship, Ellis Island. And I think, oh my goodness, they were so brave, you know, with nothing and just coming over here. But anyhow, they met over here and had a very happy life. But I admire them, and I have seen their names on the, they call it the board of honor, their names, because I did my mother, Carolina Sipat Vadadi, and my sister, my late sister, did Pop on that board of honor. We each gave $100, and their names are on that wall of honor it was called. And that's so exciting when you go to see it, to think they came on the ship on the ocean, I don't know how many days. And Pop said, when he saw the Statue of Liberty, oh, we're getting near to this country, he would say. He knew he was getting close to the country, and they came here to make a better life.
The journey wasn't easy at all because according to the law in 1903, people who hadn't done their military service, hadn't turned 24, or had been in some sort of court proceedings weren't allowed to set foot on a foreign land without a special permit. You needed to secure a passport from a notary public. You were warned not to fall for the words of travel agents, but should have an invitation letter received from your acquaintances or relatives. Given that immigrants from Hungary weren't required to have photos in their passports, there was the possibility of their being loaned or sold. The journey from Prekmurska took about 10 to 20 days, or even longer. Upon arrival, it was necessary to pay $25 or provide a confirmation statement that the amount had been paid by someone else.
My grandfather came first in 1911, and my grandmother came 2 years later with the first two children in 1913. My grandparents died when I was like 2 years old, so I never got to talk to them about it. But I've been to Ellis Island and toured the museum there, and I know the conditions were not very good.
Most immigrants took the train to the Atlantic ports, where a lot of them saw the sea for the first time in their lives. In a way, this was a shock for them, since they were afraid of storms and sinking. When a ship sailed into the New York harbor, its passengers would see the Statue of Liberty from far away, and right next to it, the Ellis Island, also called the Island of Tears. It was the symbol of hope and opportunity to millions of people, but at the same time it represented the refusal of entry into America. At the time when a reception center and a hospital were being constructed on the island, the immigrants were processed in the southeast part of Battery Park in Manhattan. On January 2, 1892, the center on Ellis Island was put into operation. That was when all steerage and third-class passengers started to be taken directly to the island by ship. First- and second-class passengers were inspected on the ship. Those that were brought to the island were put into quarantine and went through customs and medical examinations. The latter was the most feared by all. Fear of medical examinations was justified, since it represented the main restrictive force of the state, aiming to prevent the arrival of unwanted people. The doctors would turn down anyone who had a dangerous infectious disease if a physical or mental defect was found, or if a person was mentally challenged, which would not make it possible for them to lead a normal life. If the illness was curable, the patient was sent to the Ellis Island Hospital. Whoever was incurably ill or was for any other reason denied entrance was sent home at carrier's cost. Others were allowed entrance into a hall with services for money exchange, purchase of tickets, and telegraph. Every immigrant had to show to the commission that they had at least 125 crowns or $25 and a ticket to their chosen destination. The entrance fee was $4. If the person didn't have this amount, they had to wait on the island until they got it. As the entry conditions became stricter, the number of those that were rejected also increased. After 1910, there were as many as 24,000 rejections every year. After all formal inspections were conducted, the immigrants would be taken to Manhattan, where they formally set foot on American soil. At the time of mass immigration, from 1855 to 1954, approximately 12 million immigrants came to America, of which around 92,000 were Slovenes. However, for most immigrants, New York was merely an intermediate station. As soon as they crossed the American threshold, the immigrants' American life started. They would take the train to reach their desired destination, where their family or relatives awaited for them, later helping in their first endeavors in America.
My name is Shirley Messick's DeLucio. I am pure Windish because my maternal grandparents, Kuchan, and my paternal grandparents, Messicks, came from what they would call Yugoslavia. My grandmother and both sets emigrated from the old country 1913, 1914. My mother's mother, my Grammy Kuchan, talks about walking during the night, leaving her village, her parents sending her to America, and having to walk very far. And when she got to the railroad station to be able to go to the ship, she was turned back because she had pink eye. And she had to return to her village, and sooner or later made the trek again and came to America. She was sponsored by somebody, I think in Allentown, and as she was growing up, worked in cigar factory.
Upon arrival to the USA, a lot of immigrants from Prekmurska Slovenia would settle in Bethlehem. The farming conditions were very favorable there. As the immigrants had been farmers in their hometowns, the province reminded them a lot of the places they came from. Another reason they would stay in Bethlehem was the fact that the town was connected through rail with New York Harbor, where they had disembarked from their ships. Bethlehem is known as an old town with historic buildings and other reminders of the first immigrants. In 1741, the town was founded by Moravian and Czech immigrants as a village organized as a religious commune, following a particular doctrine, with the goal to Christianize the Native Americans living there. One of the first immigrants from prekmurka in the South Bethlehem, Jože Celec, settled there as early as 1893. It wasn't long before others followed, and in 1915, there were already around 7,000 of prekmurka immigrants living there.
Both my mother and my father were born here. My grandparents came from Slovenia. My grandfather, Podlesek, came from Suburbica. And my grandmother was a Vrečich. And she was, I don't know what small village, but she was in a small village near Murska Sobota. When I was in Slovenia in '73 with the choir, I actually had dinner at the house where my grandfather was born. And it was my cousin still lives there. My grandfather had one brother, Vincent, and the brother stayed in Slovenia. My grandfather came here. And the brother that stayed in Slovenia had 3 sons, and I met all 3 sons and spent time in their homes, which was really a very nice feeling.
By 1924, when the USA closed their doors, agents would look for people willing to travel there. They would even cover the immigrants' expenses. In 1924, an agency from Ljubljana offered to pay Prekmurka Bank a commission of $5 for each person it would send across the ocean. Arriving in the new environment abroad wasn't that big of a challenge, but it was the final step in what had sometimes been very long preparations, which arose from financial difficulties and the need to acquire more possessions or avoid hardships. Worker incomes were very different, from 25 cents for beginners up to $2.45 a day. Lodgings were rented out for $11 to $12, while food costs were $14 to $15 a month. Despite the low income, the newcomers would arrange their basic living conditions and put some money on the side, also managing to send a few dollars back home.
My name is Betty Silva, or Elizabeth Silva. I was Elizabeth Bobic, and my mother was a Zrinski from Ivanovci. I know that my mother learned to cook in one of the houses where she lived. She was only 16. And I never met any of my father's family over in Europe when I was there. But I met quite a few of my mother's family. And it was a pleasure to go to Slovenia to meet my family.
This is Štefan Untitled. I'm sitting here with Jože Glažar and Štefan Celec, unje male vrak is een stade vrak. And I'm sitting in the famous Tally-Ho Tavern where my history of drinking begins. Because when I started Lehigh University, and in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, you can't drink until you're 21 years old. So finally, when I was 21, I came in and had my first beer here. So here I am, age of 87, back at the Tally-Ho, beginning of my scenes of my first crime. In any event, Tally-Ho is in Bethlehem, and the city of Bethlehem has a very interesting history. It was originally founded in 1741 by the Moravians who settled here, and what is now South Bethlehem was just fields. And they lived on the other side of the river, which is now North Bethlehem. So they developed the lands on the south side by selling them off to people who made them farmlands. And at that time, you could not own property in Bethlehem unless you belonged to the Moravian Church. And they kept it very, very strict.
My grandparents came from the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. My grandfather's name was Gergar, Sándor Gergar. He was born 1890, and he came here August 1910. Actually, I have the papers from Ellis Island showing his date that he came here and the boat that he came on. He was from Križevice, if I'm saying it right, which is the northeast section of Slovenia. And he also knew my grandmother, who was from, I think it's Kustanovic, which was maybe a few miles away, and they used to attend the same church. And they used to walk. One Sunday would be one church, the other Sunday would be the other church. She was born 1892. Her name was Francesca Foyce. She came here in 1911, where she met my grandfather again.
And Zrejlo grew, and as a result, it needed many laborers, so that the United States opened up the doors to immigrants to come in to work at the steel and work at the mines. So it was almost like, as I said before, a steam shovel came to Prekmurska and grabbed 5,000 to 7,000 Slovenes, brought them over and dropped them right in Bethlehem.
My grandmother was working in a cigar factory here in Bethlehem, and my grandfather had a ash business, if I remember. He had a horse and a buggy that used to collect the ashes from the coal, and also had a job at Bethlehem Iron Works, which was the Bethlehem Steel, but it was called Bethlehem Iron Works at the time.
The majority of the population to the south of the Lehigh River comprised immigrants that settled in the immediate vicinity of their employment. First, they would rent a room or humble lodgings from their relatives or cousins. The steel mill complex was situated on a narrow plain along the Lehigh River, and the settlement spread into the flat-topped hill. Stores, a church, clubs, and other buildings were all built nearby so that people could reach them on foot in a matter of minutes.
North Bethlehem, Moravians and the community of North Bethlehem didn't like that because they looked upon these people as foreign invaders. They're coming to live in their country, and they considered themselves Native Americans. The true Native Americans were the Indians. But in any event, they were very strict and harsh on the people of the South Side, and they called South Bethlehem shanty town. The word shanty town means living in a pig pen.
In 1917, when South Bethlehem was merged with the North Bethlehem, it had around 25,000 people, 70% of whom had been born in Europe or were the first immigrant generation of children.
The newspaper article even mentioned that Bethlehem is so good that they allow the scum of Central Europe, meaning our people, to come live with them. So my mother and father, my mother came over 11 years old, my father was 16, so they were scum, and were treated like that. So for me to grow up as a young boy, I felt second class, and that persisted. But they didn't come out and say it, but you felt second class because you weren't invited to join this club or that club, but they didn't say why. They would say, well, if you work hard and study and good, you can become a member, but they never invited you in, which made you feel, gee, I'm not good enough.
Well, the grandparents came over in 1903 from Bordevecha. They came over in the Brandenburg, landed at Ellis Island. Stephen and Adam Dew, one went to the farm in Hellertown. On my dad's side, he went to Bethlehem Steel for work. They had to have good health, sponsorship, money in the pocket. It was tough back then, but they raised some big families, like about 10 to 13 children. They raised their farm products, worked for Campbell's tomato soup products. They raised turkeys on the farm. And on my dad's side, we were in brick coat, plastering, did some electrical work.
The Slovenian national background was being visibly emphasized in advertisements, magazines, jubilee brochures of churches and support associations. They were hoteliers, printers, butchers, tailors, bakers, tradesmen, and other craftsmen. This proves that the Prekmurati people weren't merely workers in the steel mill or other factories.
I am Mary Carroll, or Maria Paycheck, from Quincy in Prekmurska, Slovenia. I came to America in 1957, but not of my own will. It was something my parents and my aunt wanted. I worked in a sewing factory, and before retiring, I worked in the kitchen of a home for the disabled. I've had a pretty interesting life because I never really wanted to go to America. Today, things are going smoothly in my life. I'm retired and busier compared with the time when I was still working.
At the time of the blooming industry, Bethlehem became the center of heavy industry. The first ironworks company in Bethlehem was founded in 1857. Bethlehem Steel Corporation became the second largest manufacturer of steel in the USA. At the time, the steel mill had 3,500 employees, most of them from Prekmurati and Parabia, making armors for battleships, screws, machinery, heavy cannons, and railway rails.
So basically, my grandfather came to this country in 1919, worked at the steel company for 20 years, then he opened up a bar, was self-employed. My Uncle Frank and my grandfather had 3 children. Louis, Joe, which was my father, and his sister Margaret. My 2 uncles worked at the steel company, and my father was self-employed. All right. We currently own Saucon Valley Acres, which was built by this church in 1916.
St. John's Windish Lutheran
St. John's Windish Lutheran Church. It was a picnic grove. The building was built by a gentleman by the name of Temlin, which was Slovenian. And the facility was basically used as a gathering place for churches to come on weekends and have picnics, polka bands, dance, and have fun.
Although Slovenian immigrants came to the U.S. mostly as unqualified workers of modest education, they started their new life path at the bottom of the social scale and began to successfully organize themselves very early on. They established church communities and within them their own cultural and support societies. This was all caused by social pressure.
So the 2 communities, at that time, they became very friendly because in Bethlehem, anyone who came from Europe was unwelcome and they were considered to be foreign invaders. They got together and they formed a first Slovenska Production. It was the first Windish beneficial society.
On June 4th, 1912, 41 immigrants got together and established the first South Bethlehem Sick and Beneficial Society to help patients and others in need. All Slovenes found their common goal there, forming branch offices of the society in which money was collected and sent home to Prekmurati and Parabia. The first evangelical society in Bethlehem was founded on September 5, 1915. A Catholic society, the Roman Catholic Slovene Society of St. Joseph for the Sick, was established on June 4, 1916. That same year, Prekmurci built their Evangelical Church of St. John. And the next year, the Catholic Church of St. Joseph.
Evangelical Lutherans went to St. Peter's Evangelical Lutheran Church, which was a German-speaking church, and some spoke German. And because it was evangelical and Lutheran, they then decided they wanted their own church. So they built St. John's, Windisch, evangelical Lutheran, while the Catholic people were at the Hungarian church. They didn't feel welcome, so they built their own church. It was St. Joseph's Church.
The first evangelical priests were Americans of German descent, William and Ernest Stiegler. The Slovene Franciscans of St. Cross in Bridgeport, who had sent Anselm to Bethlehem, were responsible for the Slovene Catholic parish.
Ja, zanimivo, gledajte, ta luteranska cerkev, to je edina luteranska slovenska luteranska cerkev.
It's interesting. The only Slovene Lutheran church outside Slovenia is the one in Bethlehem. When you come to think of it, the people coming to this part of the world all knew each other from back home, some Lutherans and others Catholics, and what faith it must have been that they would build two churches during the First World War, depriving themselves of their life's necessities. Life wasn't easy back then, but one has to have respect for this awareness, persistence, and stubbornness of Slovenes to have something of their own.
In 1916, the Slovenian Center was built. It became the center of cultural and social life in Bethlehem. After 1919, the society was partially engaged in the political action for the return of Prekmurska to Hungary, based on the Wendish theory. The research on the topic of prekmurska, being Wendish or Slovene, was initiated by Štefan Antolić.
My son asked me, Dad, you're Wendish. I said, I'm Wendish. I said, yes. He said, well, what is Wendish? No one could tell him. No one could explain where the word Windisch came from. Some people said there was a country called Windasia and they gave it away for a white horse. So this embarked me on my study, and that study then took me all through Europe for 5 years, gathering documents in Hungary, Austria, England, Slovenia, even Croatia, and here in America, National Archive, till I finally was able to discover that the word Windisch was an old German word Wend, so it was a plot just to keep Prekmurska territory from going to Yugoslavia.
To this end, the Hungarian authorities also sent priests across the ocean. In addition to their mission, these priests made sure that the people remained politically loyal to the Hungarian crown.
Mađarska oblast je pa veliko dala na to, da prepričuje te obmejne Slovence.
The Hungarian authorities went to great lengths to convince these border Slovenes that they weren't Slovenes, but Hungarians. In fact, there exist these very precise lists that tell us whom they would send here, when, and how. These Slovene priests would be sent to America to persuade their Slovene compatriots that they were not Slovenes, but Windisch or Hungarians. That led to some bad things happening, one might say. I remember these Hungarians coming, and there was one particular case where a priest came to see Golob in Bridgeport, and the latter very quickly realized that he wasn't a real Slovene priest. He then chased him away, and the priest went to Bethlehem, where he lived in an inn owned by a Hungarian, and from there, he then made things difficult for our father Anselmo. What he did was spread lies.
In je pol iz tiste zgostilne štrine mešal temu našemu patru Anselmu, ga je vse mogoče stvari širil govorice neresnične in tako.
The decline of the Wendish theory in practical life was mostly brought about by the printer and editor Alexander Kardash and the teacher Alexander Polgar, who arrived in Bethlehem in 1922. Their zeal helped the Bethlehem Prekmurska community to direct its energy from the political to the ethnic and cultural fields. In the English language, the Slovenes and Prekmurska were called Wendish until 1996.
Now, the true story. The sister city of Bethlehem and Murska Sobota is an accident. Why is it an accident? Very simply, for one reason. I was staying at the Signor in Martiansi because it was the closest Castilna to where my father was born in Nordsjön. I'm there in the morning having breakfast, and there's a TV crew there doing a commercial. And who's doing the commercial? Gospod Celec and Mr. Balajic. So he asked me, since I was coat and tie, and the two well-dressed women at another table asked me to join their table because it looked like a family. So I joined their table, and we started talking, and then they asked me where I was from. I said, I'm from Bethlehem. And the woman said, you're from Bethlehem? My God, my uncle is from Bethlehem. It's Frank Piff. And it was like home week. So we got talking, and I knew her family in Bethlehem. And then Mr. Celec got very interested in what I was doing, so I showed him what I was doing. He said, this is incredible. What are you doing tomorrow morning? I said, nothing. Come down at TV station, we'll put you on television. And next thing you know, that night I get a phone call from the mayor. He said, this is incredible, because he knew about the Windish problem, because in World War II, the Germans gave part of prekmurska back to the Hungarians. So he said, come in and see me tomorrow morning and we'll talk about it. So we got talking about it, and we decided, how can we solve that problem? How can we bring the Slovenes of Bethlehem out of the Windish mode and into the Slovenian family? So we talked about it, and it took almost a year and a half. I was already about 2 or 3 years into my study. So then we decided the best way to do it was to form a sister city. Because the word Windish, or Vend, to Mayor Gedenscher was a dirty word. But over in Bethlehem, the word Windish was big time. And I knew, and this is like, we set up a plot that he wouldn't sign any paper with Windish on it. So I knew this was gonna happen. So anyway, that night before the signing, he had him redraw the papers to make Windish Day Slovenian Day. So, but had not Mr. Celec been there, there would be no sister city.
This is how the Bethlehem Murska Sobota Sister Cities Association came to be. The ceremony was attended by more than 200 Prekmartians and their sympathizers. Frank Podlasic was chosen as the first president.
We wanted to make connections with our relatives and our background from Slovenia. We wanted to make that connection. And actually, the whole idea was started by Steve. And then he got me involved, and then between the two of us, we got the two churches involved, and that's how it all started.
I offended a lot of people because I was telling them that for 80 years they weren't really Windish, they were Slovenian. So, but then the people in Bethlehem were lost to the whole world, because out 10 miles out of Bethlehem, no one heard the word Windish. So people coming from Slovenia never came to Bethlehem because there weren't any Slovenes in Bethlehem. They were Windish. So then by becoming Slovenian Day and having this exchange, all of a sudden we're now reunited into the international Slovenian community. So that's basically a thumbnail of the origins of Windish, Slovene, and a sister city.
I'm not Slovenian by birth or origin. I came to the congregation here at St. John's Windish through Lehigh University. I was taking graduate courses there because I intended to teach, and I met my future wife. We married in 1976. We were both in our 40s by that time, so we had no children. We joined it, we became a part of it. And in my case, since I was writing for a newspaper, or retired by that time, they needed somebody to take the meeting minutes and to make a newsletter. So I made up their newsletter for 2-3 years, and I served as a corresponding secretary, a recording secretary, and then I've been on the board off and on ever since. But that's my whole story, really. It's nothing beyond that, and I enjoy it. For as long as I'm able to, I will continue serving on the board.
The meetings became more frequent. The first memorial was signed on the 3rd anniversary of the twinning in Murska Sobota when the latter was visited by 29 cousins from America.
I'm glad to see here Štefan Antalić, who was the first to start this off. I have to admit that I was really pleased when we were signing the document of cooperation between Murska Sobota and Bethlehem.
Meeting with the relatives was very emotional, and many a tear was dropped.
We visited areas of Slovenia, and it was the first time where I guess I saw all the old traditions, the buildings, the old haystacks. We took a little bus tour up toward Murska Sobota, but I never got a chance to visit the towns where my grandparents came in because we were pressed for time. It just hit home. I was able to see all the old traditions.
The Wendish theory, nonetheless, left some traces. The front of the Evangelical Church of St. John still holds the sign, Wendish, which is more of a material remnant of the past than an expression of the current state of mind of the descendants of the first Prekmurska immigrants. A lot of Slovene immigrants have been buried in Bethlehem. There are 3 cemeteries where their families can bury them. God's Acre speaks of the religious beliefs of United Brothers. Niski Hill expresses neutrality, while St. Michael is primarily Catholic. The parents of Štefan Antalić also found their resting place there. The Slovene community in a once blooming industrial center in the American state of Pennsylvania still hasn't come to terms with the decision of the Catholic Diocese of Allentown to close, among the numerous other so-called ethnic parishes, the Church of St. Joseph, which was built by immigrants from Prekmurska at the beginning of the 20th century. At that time, the then-Bishop Edward Peter Cullen had to reorganize due to the lack of priests, maintenance funds, and parishioners. A number of parish churches was then closed and sold. The last service was held on July 13, 2008. The closure decision was received with great disappointment. After protest meetings, a complaint was submitted to the Vatican asking to force the diocese to reopen the church. It would take only a little more and the church would be sold for $400,000, with the Center for Medical Health also getting their premises there. At Vatican's request, 7 churches were later reopened for occasional service, among them also being the Slovene one, while parishes remained abolished. Thus, the Slovene parish was abolished and joined with the Hungarian and the Slovak, while the church is only open on the named day of St. Joseph and for funerals. All other days of the year it remains closed. The church gatekeeper opened it for us somewhat unwillingly. In the 15 minutes we had to take the video shots, we were convinced that the church, decorated with great colorful stained glass that had been a present of the immigrants from parts of Prekmurska and Parabia, remains in good condition.
Bethlehem has changed tremendously over the last 20 years. 20 years ago, Bethlehem Steel was the main occupation, the main industry in the city, and they closed in 1995 and filed for bankruptcy a few years later. 25,000 people worked in the steel. It was our largest taxpayer, it was our largest water user, it was our largest employer.
Today, along the remains of the Bethlehem Steel, there is a multifunctional space with a casino, game rooms, and a concert venue where the second biggest U.S. music festival, Music Fest, has started taking place.
Bethlehem of today, 2016, is much different than the Bethlehem of 1995. Our economy is more diverse. We became more in the meds and the eds, and we've been very fortunate that we've been able to make that transition from a one industry down to a very diverse community.
Bethlehem is also a higher education center. The Lehigh University, established in 1865, is attended by some 7,000 students. In 2010, according to U.S. News & World Report, it was ranked 35th. Slovenes met for the last time on the celebration of the 20th anniversary of the association. The city also received its first mayor, who is the descendant of Prekmurska parents. Robert Donches took an oath on January 6, 2014.
My grandparents on both sides came from Europe, from outside of Murska Sobota. I'm very proud of our heritage, and we're very proud of our relationship between Bethlehem and Murska Sobota. NOVAK and his wife and the organization have done a fabulous job at maintaining the relationship between the two cities.
I think we have something like 168 people. I'm trying to get over 200. At one time we had over 200, but unfortunately we had some of the older people that passed away. My grandparents came from a Prekmurska region in 1909. My father was born here in 1917, and my grandfather spoke only Slovenian to me. Both my parents, my grandparents, their last names were the same, Novak. Her father was a pastor, and my grandfather's father was a farmer.
G. Novak and his wife Kathy conscientiously manage the student exchange of the sister cities.
I'm sort of in charge of our students. Technically, it's not a student exchange because the Slovenian students would have difficulty here in the schools. Well, it's mainly the American students would have a bigger difficulty in the schools in Slovenia since we don't have students here that speak Slovene. We usually try to get one student here every year from the sister city. We pay all of their expenses, including their airfare, and the only thing they need is any spending money. So far we've had, I'd never counted, maybe 13 students. We have another one coming this summer for 3 weeks. We usually have them for 3 weeks. We make sure they see New York City, Washington, D.C., and Lancaster. A lot of them are interested in the Amish and the history there. We enjoy it. Nobody else volunteers to have the students, and we do not want to see this stop because it took a lot of years before we were able to implement it. So we try to stay involved like that. We love the Slovenian people. I'm constantly promoting people to join the Sister City Association, not just for the sake of saying they belong to Bethlehem Murska Sobota Sister Cities Association, but to support what we do and what we hope to do in the future. We enjoy it and we hope to continue it as long as we can. Jean and I are getting older, so we have to find some younger people to do this too. But we love going to Slovenia and hope to go back next year.
Marija Skrilec immigrated to Bethlehem in the 1960s. She is now a treasurer of the Sister Cities Association.
I am Marija
Skrilec. I am from Polana, Murska Sobota. I have been living in America for 50 years. I arrived here in 1966. But before I continue, I'd like to say hello to all the locals, neighbors, and residents of Murska Sobota. I am a treasurer of the Union of Twin Cities. We have been very busy organizing picnics and lunches every year in order to obtain some funds. 3 to 4 times a year, we take the bus to the casino to get some money. The remaining funds come from our society members.
The 20th anniversary of the signing of the proclamation that enabled the twinning of cities held in Bethlehem was celebratory. The celebration started on the square in front of the town hall with hymns and the raising of flags of both countries. The Slovene flag was lifted by the founder of the Sister Cities Association, Štefan, while the American flag was lifted by the Bethlehem mayor, Robert Donches. The ceremonial speaker at the event was the ambassador of the Republic of Slovenia, Božo Sedar.
I would like to thank you once again for your contribution, devotion, your fostering American-Slovenian friendship. Hvala lepa. Thank you. Dobar dan.
The document of gratitude of the mayor of Murska Sobota, Alexander Jože, was handed to the president of the society, G. Novak, by Brigitte Bashar.
I'm glad to be here with you
and honored to give our mayor award for 20 years of Sister City Association Bethlehem Murska Sobota.
In memory of all of our immigrants who came to Bethlehem, South Bethlehem area, and made this...
On this occasion, a memorial sign was unveiled amidst the greenery of the town hall. With the sounds of Slovene music in the background, the memories of the visits were revived by some of those who had traveled to their homeland.
From the mountains to the prairie, to the ocean, white with foam, goddess America, my own sweet home.
Yeah, we look forward to having that event every year. It makes our ties stronger between the two communities. And I think that in the future we may want to see some student exchanges and really expand on the partnership that we have between the two cities.
All these years, there have been a lot of student exchanges from one side as well the other. And we want to have even more of that, especially because in Bethlehem there is a well-known university, and I personally feel that it will be very nice for the higher education programs here in Murska Sobota to connect with this university. I'm going to present this idea to the rector of Maribor University, and I'm convinced that he will welcome it. What we want and plan to do next year is host a get-together of Slovenes aboard and around the world here in Murska Sobota, and I will be very happy to see the mayor and delegation of our Bethlehem competitors come to visit us.
It's nice to have an organization, the sister city, trying to keep the traditions up. It hits the heart, really. It makes me feel good, and I'm glad to carry on whatever traditions that I can. And I really hope that we can keep the sister city going on with the traditional things that I grew up with along with my parents.